Hello and welcome to a special edition of Newsmakers. I'm your host, Jess Brady. Newsmakers is all about having in-depth discussions about hot topics in London. Over the next month, chatter about the provincial election will likely reach a fever pitch. The party leaders are crisscrossing the province and local candidates are out knocking on doors in their ridings, trying to convince as many voters as possible to tick the circle next to their names on the ballots come June 7th. So as the fate of the next Ontario government hangs in the balance, we're going to take a look at some of the biggest topics in the campaign. To do that, we've assembled a panel of esteemed guests who will share their perspectives on these hot-button issues. Cheryl Miller is a local political commentator and former member of London City Council. Peter Bergmanis is the co-chair for the London Health Coalition. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Matt Farrell, who is a political science professor at Fanshawe College. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you all here.
Our pleasure. And I loved the kick-in where she said it was going to reach a fever pitch.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for that.
Don't jinx it. I mean, be careful what you wish for.
Well, there's no fever out there right now.
Well, as we know, things can kind of turn on a dime in terms of political campaigns, and things will inevitably become a lot busier as things pick up steam, I'm sure. People across the province are really starting to, hopefully, be interested in this campaign, because I'm talking a lot about it on the news. So hopefully people are listening and being engaged by some of this. I feel like this could be, in some ways, the most loaded election we've seen in a long time. And by loaded, I mean with history in terms of the candidates and the parties, loaded in terms of the political spectrum that the parties are, like where they sit on the political spectrum right now. It almost feels like we are kind of at a tipping point in terms of we don't know where we could be a year from June 7th after the election this next month. It's hard to say what the province and the political landscape might look like potentially in a year from now. And one of the biggest things that I guess will determine how we're doing is how people feel about the economy. And that's kind of going to be our first topic today. Let's start off by an open question. You know, how do you guys feel the economy is performing right now? It's open to anybody who wants to jump in, and if you have thoughts after the other person speaks, go for it. It's a bit of a free-for-all. We want to hear your thoughts. That's why you're here. So yeah, that first, I guess, initial gut reaction to that question, how is the Ontario economy doing in your perspective?
Well, first of all, I'm going to focus on London, because we know that the London economy, that the unemployment in London is very high. And it's unfortunate. And when you've got candidates knocking at the doors and finding people at home in the daytimes, their first comment is, we'd really like a job. So that's part of the issue. But provincially, we're not doing so bad, because of course Toronto is a big engine. It drives the rest of the province. Northern Ontario, our agricultural industry, as you can see with Dr. Utker picking up and a few other things like that, is thriving. So all in all, Ontario is doing okay. London, not so much.
Right.
I think I want to pick up on that, because it does, my answer would be it depends. It depends on where you live, and it depends on what you do. And we've got a lot of different diverse regions and cities in the province, and some of them are doing a lot better than others, depending on the concentration of industries. And sometimes, as you alluded to, the fortunes in London are pretty good. Other times, not so much. And again, it is highly contextual. It is highly dependent on what you do.
And in London, of course, we've gutted our manufacturing sector, and so we've lost major employers like Kellogg's, Caterpillar, GM Diesel. All of those are gone in the last 10 years. And we have to recognize that because those are unionized and very high-paying jobs, that's going to have a massive impact on the rest of the city itself. So I agree with my colleagues here that the province might be doing better, but London has got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, and just since we've talked about the provincial numbers, as of March, the unemployment rate for the province was holding steady at, I believe, 5.5%, which was lower than the national average, which is 5.8 for that month. So those numbers are from StatsCan, I should say, and the national number is actually still holding steady at, I think, a 40-year low. So, but as Matt, you've said, I mean, it really depends on your perspective, where you are. I mean, that number is great, but if you don't have a job, well, it's a bit cold comfort, isn't it?
For sure, especially in the manufacturing center. One of the things you want to be able to do as a region is have some export growth. So you're sending something out there that other regions are buying, which brings new money in and new investment into the region. We're seeing the Kitchener-Waterloo area do that pretty well with technology. They've got a lot of technology firms that are bringing in money from outside, which helps fuel the development inside. There's a lot of, I spend some time in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, a lot of cranes going up, a lot of development happening. And so when you lose that, when you lose the export base, there's not a lot of money coming into the region that's new to fuel some of the other things, the non-traded sectors like education and healthcare. We do see some in housing. We see a lot of money coming from the Toronto area that's fueling the London housing market, but is it really enough to have that secondary and tertiary growth from that? I don't think so. I don't think you can run a regional economy just on housing.
No, you can't, but one of the problems you have is with the demand on housing, the Toronto Kitchener purchasers are driving the London buyers out because they can't afford. I mean, my niece, just as recent as this past weekend, was looking at a place who would really like to put an offer, and it was $599. It sold for $743. So, like, you can't compete because that's not London's mindset.
No.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to increase the building stock. We've got applications that are backed up sitting at City Hall waiting to be approved by council. So if you don't have building stock, then local Londoners don't get a chance to purchase a home. So we've got a real problem with our housing market, because with the wave that hit us about a year and a half ago from Toronto and Kitchener on purchasers, all of a sudden the market is really almost out of touch for some of our young buyers.
Yeah.
Well, it's unaffordable.
Yeah.
This is part of the problem. Like, we don't need more mansions built in the city. We just see building everywhere. And we're wondering, where the heck is that money coming from? Because Londoners aren't participating in that. So, you know, when you have precarious employment, barely making enough to get past the poverty line, then you're not in the market for these mansions. You're in the market for affordable housing.
No,
and that's not there.
If you can't afford that house, you got to pay the hydro bill too on top of that.
Right,
Yeah.
let's go there.
Wait. There's more to go.
Sorry, jumping too far ahead.
I don't want to like deviate too much from the discussion of jobs specifically, but speaking to the point of the real estate and how GTA buyers are coming to London and our surrounding area. The other thing, if we want to sustain that type of investment, we need to have better transit. And I don't want to get too much into it. So we were talking a little bit about high-speed rail, and how there were recent announcements about that for the Windsor-Toronto corridor, how it's supposed to be great to get Londoners from London to Toronto or Pearson in 73 minutes, something like that. All well and good, but we're still a long ways off from that, and it costs a lot of money to be able to invest in that type of thing. But certainly, if you could provide jobs for the construction of that, I mean, that would be good. But it's still government money going to.
It's the dog chasing the tail.
Yeah.
Because every time that dog chases the tail, you wonder why he does it, because he can. But the problem with high-speed rail, it's talked to Callie Elliott from Thames Centre. She says it's going to devastate so much of our prime industrial land, prime agricultural land. We need that because London is now becoming the provider of food, if you notice that, the number of industries. And of course, we lost an opportunity with Cisco a number of years ago where we could have had them in. We've lost more opportunities in London than we've gained. High-speed rail would be fantastic if we could use the original tracks. Part of the issue is the leadership that's got to be put in place in London has to look at different alternatives, because it's not bad being a bedroom community. Like we are now, it's terrible because you talk about carbon footprint, driving back and forth to Toronto, all the rest of it. So this is a huge mess, and we're not going to solve it in this election, the next election, or the one down the road.
And I think that might be why these announcements are so appealing to governments, because you can announce it, you can take all the credit, and the project's not going to happen for another 20 years. So you can kick the funding down the road and you don't really have to worry about the logistics.
Right.
You get the fanfare, you get the photo ops, and then you can kind of wash your hands of it.
I wanted to pick up on the idea of not gaining back as much as we've lost, and talking about the types of investments that are being made in our region and across the province. In the last couple of days, we've heard about new money for autonomous vehicle and transportation investment. So there are a bunch of, I think, 6 centres across the province that are going to be involved in different stages of research and development. Windsor, London, Kitchener, Toronto, know, certainly Stratford also in our region has the test track, which is really neat, and they're partnering with University of Waterloo. You know, are we investing in the right areas? Certainly autonomous transportation is going to be a big issue down the road again. The future comes to us sooner than we anticipate sometimes. But in general, are we investing in the right things to get the numbers back up? Because if you lose a plant in anywhere in the province that employs hundreds of people, but you know, you put in another industry or another factory that'll do maybe 70 employees. Great for 70 workers, but are we doing enough to really bring those numbers back up and boost them province-wide?
Don't know if that's even going to be the answer. We're going down the road of automation for a lot of skills, and no matter how many new plants we recreate, we will not need the same level of workers. It's just an obvious fact of life. And we know that even in the non-traditional areas where skills would be deemed to be, you know, there's no way a robot could do it. We now know even in surgery we can do this with a robot distantly. So non-traditional work areas are now becoming, you know, the very same susceptibility to precariousness and low wage, if you can believe that. And so, yeah, the future is not necessarily all going to be rosy when it comes to a lot of human beings having a lot of high-paid jobs, but we do have to look forward to, well, then what do you do? And that might be touching upon how do we create a stronger social welfare state? How do we have basic income for people? And you know, that's a big question.
Well, you're absolutely right, and of course, autonomous cars are sexy.
Tesla, come on.
I'd love to do that. Hands-free, put makeup on. You know, everybody would panic. They panic when I drive, anyways. But the problem with that is you still need infrastructure, and our infrastructure. And if anybody goes downtown for the next number of months, you'll find that there is no infrastructure down there. And it's chaos, and Londoners are being inconvenienced and they don't like it. So when you're looking at these sexy projects, you still have to have a road underneath it. Infrastructure is a very, very, very expensive. Anything you do, as soon as you have to get into sewers and the water, hydro, the rest of it's very expensive. So we have to upgrade the infrastructure to bring in the sexy cars. It's just, the problem is, you're right. I mean, there's just no jobs. There's no money to create wealth on infrastructure. You've got, who's going to pay for it? My kids, my grandkids, your grandkids?
And it's a presumption that everyone's into a personal vehicle that they're going to have chauffeur them around. And that's probably not sustainable either.
No,
I can't afford that.
Well, you get a grant from the government if you do.
It is a matter of focus too. I mean, like you're both alluding to, the infrastructure is the platform. And you can build applications on that platform. And I think the autonomous vehicles are just a cool application. Like you said, they're no good without a platform to run on. So I think most municipalities, London especially, we're really struggling on the infrastructure side.
And you know, when we talk about and change and growth is painful when you have to make those infrastructure changes. I know Kitchener-Waterloo went through a heck of a time when they were getting their infrastructure work done in their core. Not happy times for commuters in that city. Same is going to be happening here in London. I know that there are a lot of underlying issues that complicate it, especially with the funding and the foresight. Sometimes it feels like, you know, that old adage of, to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. You got to sit through the nasty stuff to really get to the good things at the end of the tunnel sometimes, unfortunately. Which kind of, you know what, we should probably take a break before we get into the next topic, because I know this panel is fantastic and we're going to want to just keep going without taking a break, and we need to do that. So we will be right back after this.
The shenanigans with Hydro One, caving into the teachers. The teacher makes 50% more than the average salary for working 50% less time. It doesn't add up, but it's all political motivated, I think.
Transportation, specifically for the larger cities like Toronto, becomes a bigger issue as the city grows. Healthcare is always a huge issue. Paying for a growing seniors population, long-term care, and chronic illness, I think, is a big concern for both the province and the city.
Omni Television has been a dependable voice serving Canada's multilingual communities for nearly 40 years, and now we need your support. Deeply rooted in your community, Omni is a vital part of the rich history of ethnic broadcasting in Canada. Omni is committed to reflecting your voice in your language from your local perspective, because we are a part of your community too. Your stories need to be heard. Go to supportomnitv.ca to add your voice to the #SupportOmniTV campaign today.
For 25 years, you've been helping to make our roads safer by doing the right thing. You've been the designated driver, you've stayed over, called home, you've called a cab or a friend, and planned ahead. Let's keep doing the right thing. Support sober driving by getting yourself and your friends home safely.
Do the right thing.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
This season on Vintage Nights.
Domi, hat trick, 4-2, London Legion.
It's exciting to be here. Exciting to see my name up there.
Also to Maroon, scores. What a tic-tac-toe play that was. And Maroon completes the hat trick. Robert Thomas, shot, scores, rebounds.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We are in the midst of a discussion with our wonderful panel about economic issues in the provincial election. Obviously, we have the campaign that's ramping up. We're gaining steam, and Election Day is set for June the 7th, and Ontarians have a lot to consider before they head into the voting booth and tick their ballots for who they want to vote for. When we left off, like I said, we were talking about the economy and the idea of perhaps having to break some eggs to make an omelet. You have to sometimes go through some tough times before you can get the payoff and see results that you're hoping for. I'm wondering, do we think that is potentially the case with the minimum wage increase that the Liberals instituted as of January 1st of this year, going from 11 some odd dollars an hour up to 14? It was a big jump. A lot of small business owners were feeling the pinch on that one. And there is another scheduled increase for January 1st of 2019, bumping it up $1 more to $15 an hour. So open question to whomever would like to answer first. Was this an omelet situation where we got to go through a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain for those who are struggling on the lower paying jobs in the economy, or was this just a ploy and, you know, not really going to pay off long term because of other residual factors like increased cost of living, things that naturally go along with wage levels, I suppose. So, any ideas? Omelets or spoiled rotten eggs?
Interesting that you would mention the omelet analogy. It is attributed to Joseph Stalin.
Oh, so dear.
I don't think we would like to go
Peter.
down that path.
Peter.
And we saw what happened to their society. So no way would you ever suggest that raising a basic level of survival income is going to make our society worse. And I would strongly suggest that it hasn't happened or materialized anywhere where it was warned that it would. It certainly didn't happen in Seattle, and that's been in place in that city for over a decade. And down there, they can actually, municipalities can actually dictate what minimum wage levels can be. So, you know, when you give more money, and our friends in the Conservative Party are always talking about putting more money in the pockets of the worker, that they're going to spend it. And this was one instance where they actually do, because they spend it in their own community. They don't have offshore accounts where they can hide their tax money. So they actually spend it in the community. Helps those very same small business owners that might be perturbed by the increase. Never actually hear so much out of the individual business owner unless they're trying to gain some sort of political traction on an ideologically based argument. But you certainly did hear it from the Small Business Owners Association, which is run by some very well-to-do, well-heeled individuals who are paid to do it. So I mean, I don't really have any issue with that. More money for the people, all the better.
Okay. Well, I think it was unfortunate the way it was done. The Conservatives weren't opposed to the minimum wage hike. They were opposed to the method and how it was done. The difficulty is you can't turn on a dime, and if you are involved in business or own a business, you understand that when your overhead goes up, then your bottom line goes down, and they're in business to pay these employees. So they had to restructure, and there's a number of people who lost their job. Let's not lose sight of the other side, that when the minimum wage went up, there was a number of people who lost their jobs and a number of businesses who had to reorganize their business. However, having said that, I'm never opposed to somebody getting more money. If we want to talk about getting more money, then I'd like to jump in and say, let's change the whole social assistance in this province of Ontario instead of these horrible clawbacks. So if you get a job and you work, you're on social assistance, you work, the government claws all that back. What kind of incentive is that to get out and work? There isn't. So if we want to look at the financial situation in this province, it's awful. It doesn't matter where you look at it, whether you're Conservative, Liberal, or NDP. This whole thing needs to be addressed, but nobody's taking a bite out of it.
I will offer that you mentioned the Seattle case, a lot of mixed and interesting empirical results coming out of Seattle, some winners and some losers as a result of raising the minimum wage in different areas. But I think we may be focused a little too much on the actual nominal wage rate. And I think we need to focus on how much you actually have in your pocket at the end of the day. Because if you can increase the minimum wage all you want, but if that's getting eaten up by increased fuel prices, increased housing prices, and then electricity, then are you really making much more at the end of the day? And so I think those are probably part of a broader set of questions that I think need to be had in concert with discussions about the minimum wage.
Yeah. Increased fuel prices, for instance, and such things as utility prices. Well, when you have a deregulated market, you pay what the market bears. That inflation is happening whether those people are making that money or not. And the best positioned people to ride that out are those with wealth, right? So that's why it didn't matter if they got a little bit more bump in the money. Inflation's still going to happen. We have mortgage rates going up, irregardless of what the heck is happening in the economy, because they know the market will bear it. And the wealthy can bear it.
Well, I don't know if that's quite true. If you look at what happened, the collapse in the United States when the market went crazy and people were buying houses on no dollars. We don't ever want to see that, because that's devastation. But let's talk about devastation. Let's talk about what's happening in Michigan. Nobody was hit worse than Michigan. Have you seen what's going on there?
Which reference?
Well, the increased wealth, the building, the houses, the business picking up. Why is that?
I haven't heard that statistic, so I mean,
I've heard quite a bit about Detroit specifically. Yeah. I couldn't speak to the state overall, but I know that there's been a really big boom in Detroit specifically in terms of housing and just a reinvestment, almost like a renaissance, I guess.
Yeah, it is a renaissance, because
there's something about drinking water in Michigan somewhere.
Oh no,
stay away from that.
No. You don't go to Michigan. But no, I mean there's so many examples that's going on that it's kind of frightening. And I get very worried for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, because all this is going to be passed down the road. You know that. I'm not paying for it. You're not paying for it. You're not.
Well, it's funny then. How come a couple of generations ago they paid for everything, higher tax rates, built what we have that we are struggling to hold on to, and they could afford it, and yet we can't afford it, the wealthiest province in this country. How is that?
Look at the deficit and the debt. I used to pay a nickel for a loaf of bread. You know, my dad made such a little bit of money that we grew our own vegetables. We went to the farmer. It was a different world. You can't compare yesterday to today. Everybody, I mean, it was a different world. And the world we're going into now is quite frightening as far as I'm concerned. Look at the deficit, look at the debt, and you tell me how we're going to pay that off.
Well, we had a bit more of a Keynesian world a couple of generations ago where we actually didn't mind paying for things up front, building infrastructure with public dollars, not trying privatization schemes, which seem to be driving a lot of this unaffordability factor. So, yeah, it was a different world. We cared about each other a lot more.
I don't think we don't care about people now.
I'm
happy to watch the show.
Spirited debate, and I love it. It's great because that's what we're here for, an exchange of views. Not to stay too much longer on the minimum wage, because I feel like we've really gone over it.
Veered away from that aspect.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's how we meander. That's how these things work sometimes. Doug Ford has said that he would put the brakes on the minimum wage and scrap the Jan 1 increase to $15 an hour. Is that going to be appealing enough to win him over some votes, or do you think it'll just be a combination of factors if people are going to vote for him? It's not based on the minimum wage. It's other things that he brings to the table.
I'd see some of the research that we've got over the past decade or so. People are voting less and less on specific issues like that. They're voting more along the lines of personal political allegiances and group political identification, whether that be political party or your ideology. So I think people will maybe, if they're initially opposed to the idea, they'll find a way to rationalize it if it means supporting their team or supporting the other team. So I don't know if that necessarily would have that big of an impact. Certainly some people would, that's welcome news for some people, small business owners, and for other people that they wouldn't be overly happy with that. So I don't know if that is really going to sway many undecided voters.
Like 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other.
Yeah.
Who you win
guess.
over, you may lose people on that, potentially.
You're right.
One question for, and this is kind of like a broader topic in terms of the political landscape nationally and in North America, because as we know, there's a certain group of talks happening, renegotiations with the United States and Mexico, a little thing called the North American Free Trade Agreement. Ontario has been very active in terms of the discussions, lobbying different states, trying to keep protectionist measures at bay, like Buy American Steel, things of that nature. There's been a lot of discussions on that. Do we think that the province, the Liberals specifically, are doing enough on that front? Or are they just kind of at the mercy of the larger forces of the Canadian government and the American government? Are we doing enough as a province? Is Wynne doing enough?
Oh, please don't get Wynne involved. No, if you're going to play with the big boys, you've got to be a big boy. No, let's not have Wynne associated with NAFTA. We've seen too many failures with this government, so no, I would appreciate her not. Yeah, please.
Is there then, in that case, are there any of the leaders that you would like to see in those talks?
I think what we've got is established a relationship, and it's interesting because Brian Mulroney is acting as an advisor. Of course, he was the Prime Minister when NAFTA took place. So I think we've got a good team.
His baby.
Huh?
It's his baby.
That is. We've got a good team that's going to United States and negotiating. There's there's trilateral, there's bilateral, there's opportunities there to change. NAFTA's going to change, we all know that. But it's interesting because I think we're moving in the right direction, more so than I first anticipated. Quite frankly, Krista Freeland made me very nervous at first, but I see quite a star in her, and I love the fight. So yeah, I don't want Kathleen Wynne. I don't want any of our provincial leaders in there at all. Just let it happen as it is.
And there are plenty of productive relationships at the subnational level between the state governors and provincial leaders across the country. So I think those sort of discussions and those relationships are going to happen no matter what's being negotiated or renegotiated. But I think I'm probably inclined to agree with you there. It's best to keep the premiers at home.
Well, you know what I would suggest? Wouldn't it be better just to have the Canadian people engaged in this instead of having it secret closed-door agreements between corporations that are deciding our fate? Our sovereignty is on the line. It's not even discussed. They can be talking about any possible ways of eliminating even further employment. We know from NAFTA 1, Brian Mulroney goes out there and says, "You will not recognize this country." Darn right I don't recognize this country. It's poorer, it's far more mean, it has fewer well-paying jobs, it's got social issues that weren't there, not to the extent it is now. And we're talking about, well, maybe we'll get a little deal on some grain. I don't think so, folks. I'm here for the people. I'm not here for our leaders who don't represent us talking in secret about this.
You sure you're not running for office?
We'll talk about it later.
That's a great.
We're breaking all sorts of stories here today, aren't we, folks?
It's a stump speech, but it also sounds so gloomy that It's raining outside. Let's not have the rain inside.
Democracy is not gloomy. I'm saying let's bring democracy to this discussion.
How? How? You say bring in the people.
Yeah, bring in the people. Why don't you show the people what's on the table? Secretive little deals. You know, like Chrystia Freeland, really?
Have you?
She wrote the book Oligarch.
Who's your MP? Who's your MP?
Who's my MP?
Yeah.
Like in London West?
Yeah. Have you gone and asked her for what they're talking about?
She doesn't know.
Well,
I didn't want to name the name. Sorry.
Well, what I do know is that it's time for a break. So we are going to take that one right now, and we'll be right back after this with more lively debate.
It's just not emphasized in the news, but I feel like the manufacturing sector needs to be really pushed if you're going to try to push for more social programs, because they need to go hand in hand. Because if you don't have more manufacturing and more jobs, then you're not going to have things for people to do, and there's going to be a weight on the government system as opposed to contributing. So
the minimum wage. Well, not raising it to the extent of $14, I think, maybe like 12, to get motivate young people to work towards a goal, you know.
I'm Sean.
James.
And Bert.
We're the Brews Brothers.
Make sure you come check us out. We're going to head to some local breweries.
Lots of great local events.
Rogers, live at 9:30 Mondays.
It's not live.
It's live.
There's no way it's live.
Bert. Mondays at 9:30. Just watch.
The 36th annual BBPA Harry Jerome Award celebrates achievements of African Canadians. From arts to academics, leaders in our community are recognized for their contributions. The 36th annual Harry Jerome Awards, our legacy.
My favorite thing about volunteering with Rogers TV is the experience. The ability to operate a handheld camera. I get to do what I'm passionate for, and I get added experience for jobs in the future. Everything about cameras and audio, video equipment, I very much enjoy doing, and I really want to get into the industry, and this is the best opportunity for me.
Looking for the best way to get the Major League Baseball games you want to watch? Rogers Super Sports Pack has you covered. With MLB Extra Innings, you'll have a premium ticket to over 2,000 out-of-market regular season games, with most games available in HD. Don't miss the action from the games you want from both the American and National Leagues. MLB Extra Innings, part of the Super Sports Pack, the ultimate package for the hardcore sports fan. Order through your remote on Channel 431 today.
To Newsmakers. We are talking about broad issues in the provincial election. These are topics that most likely by the time we hit June 6th, the day before the election, most Ontarians will probably have at least pondered a little bit at home by themselves, maybe chatted about with their family or colleagues. We left off, we were talking about economic issues, and now coming back from break, I would like to pick up on still an economic issue. This is about an issue for affordability for everyday Ontarians, and a topic that a lot of people are passionate about, hydro rates. And there has been a lot of interesting discussion about hydro, a lot of actions that have taken place in the last year and a bit regarding Hydro One and how it's regulated and run. Obviously, we've had the sell-off of a pretty big chunk of the organization and money being invested by the government in other ventures and things of that nature. Polarizing, to say the least, but a lot of people are struggling with their hydro rates. Peter, you have some thoughts about where we are in terms of hydro in the province.
Well, we know that historically, public hydro was actually polarizing when it came out in the late 19th century, too. Our great son of London, Sir Adam Beck, the founder of hydro, the public utility, and Kitchener in the early part of the 20th century, they lit up the lights, and those lights said, for the people. So here we are 100 years later, and we've divided up the public interest into what we should give to the private sector so that we can fund some of the things like infrastructure and such forth. And unfortunately, we also gave up control. So that's why Londoners are so strong about holding on to London Hydro.
And Ontarians in general.
Exactly. But also a revenue stream. That was a $700 billion generating revenue stream for the province of Ontario. they gave half of it to private investors now. That doesn't come back to us anymore. And it's going to be very difficult to bring it back into the public sphere without paying a massive premium for it. So either way, we as Ontarians are going to pay. So I don't know. Cheryl's probably got some thoughts on that.
Oh, of course I've got thoughts.
Yeah.
But the whole problem is she did that when you said for the people, find out what people want. She did that against advice from a majority of people that she didn't listen. Kathleen Wynne has never listened. They were trying to have quick sell-offs to pay down the debt. Now, if you understood or read in the paper and lately, look at the debt, look at the deficit, look at the problems we're facing. So hydro is, it's really sad because you realize it would be cheaper for Ontario to purchase hydro from Quebec. And we sell our hydro off to the United States for much cheaper than we can pay for it here.
That's right.
There is something fundamentally wrong
We're
with
selling
that.
it at a loss.
Of course we are.
We generate more of it than we can use, and we sell it at a loss.
Yeah, if we purchased it from Quebec, it would be much cheaper for everybody.
So true.
It's one of the biggest public policy challenges because you don't use the same amount of power all year round or throughout the course of a day. So how do you generate that base load and then still account for peak times? There's no easy way of doing it. And I think that's why the energy portfolio in the Ontario government is one that nobody wants to touch. If you get relegated to the Minister of Energy, then sorry about your luck.
Who was that? Wasn't that Chris?
At one time.
It sure was.
That's your
yes.
That's the curtain call right
that
there.
That was his bye-bye, yeah.
That's the posting you don't want in Ontario.
And Minister of Health.
You took my segue.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's perfect. I mean, it just means that we're ready for that next topic, which, of course, is healthcare in Ontario.
Yes.
And this, I mean, I read the news on air every day, and so many of the stories that are coming across our newswire that we're putting into our newscasts are about healthcare. And it's because it is one of those sectors that no matter who you are, it will touch you in some way. Either you personally will be in touch with the healthcare system or a loved one, whatever it may be. But in your lifetime, you will not escape the healthcare system one way or the other. And through many issues, I just feel like that portfolio is a disaster. And there are so many problems with long-term care, overcrowding, wait times for surgeries, trying to get people home when they're overseas and have suffered an emergency. I don't honestly, I mean, the parties are promising different things. Doug Ford has come out and said that he's promising tens of thousands of long-term care spots over the next 10 years or so. Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals are also promising more funding to try and ease the overcrowding and more help for mental health care. I don't know. Are any of these promises that are being put out there, and of course Andrea Horwath has put out the NDP's promises as well about substantial more funding. We're talking about dental care programs and pharmacare programs. Are any of these promises in your mind realistic? Are they really going to fix our problem, or are these band-aids and pretty decals that we can put over top of the cracks in the system? What do we think?
For at least the two of the parties, I won't speak to the Horwath regime, but they are unrealistic. They're already doing the band-aids now, and the death by 1,000 cuts has been taking place for 20 years. Under all political stripes. It's not just unique to the current Liberals, but the Liberals have been very stealthy about it. They have continued on this path of closing hospital beds, and in London alone, we lost 2,000 acute care beds over the last 20 years. And it's not discussed. I mean, a generation ago, we had more acute care beds in the city than we do now. Why do we have long waits and ORs, and why do we have code gridlock in the emerge department? Well, it's because you have less than what you were paying for a generation ago. We spent $1 billion restructuring here. No way to track any of the outcome of that. Nothing. They've done away with bed capacity studies that we used to do prior to the invention of the LINs. Oh, we have no idea. Cheryl, you can jump in. And no idea what population need is.
Yeah.
No.
And you have to start there to really grasp that, well, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't have shut down a fully functioning St. Joe's healthcare in favor of the small walk-in clinic instead. And then consider what future growth and demographics are going to be. Because yes, you have to start somewhere and you have to have some concrete plan in place. And right now, neither the Conservatives nor the Liberals do. The NDP, it's still not costed out, so I'm not going to begin to say that I think they're on the right track, but I don't know what it is yet. So
I think it's interesting because every time they make an announcement, I say to my husband, it needs to start off with once upon a time in a land, because everybody's promising everything. When Kathleen Wynne promises something, I go, where have you been for the last 10 years? Absolutely right. Healthcare, I mean, you simply have to look in the mirror. I know which direction I'm going. My husband has availed himself of the health services, and we've been on wait lists, and we've been on calls, we've been on everything, and I can't say enough about the doctors. However, the difficulty is beds. It's as simple as that. And I keep saying to people, it's not just a bed, it's a room, it's a nurse, it's that whole...
It's a funded bed.
Absolutely, and when they say add more beds, that means adding more people, and they have to realize this. But the health care is abysmal. I get my first thing is I wipe out the lins. Wipe them right out.
You both make a great point there, and the beds especially, sometimes that's code for more capital spending.
Yeah.
We're going to build bigger, more buildings, but it's got to come with the operational budget, the staffing. That's what's really missing.
And that's the truth. We have empty hallways throughout all the hospitals that we have here, and they're just empty rooms. But yes, it's the funded bed that has staffing that goes with it.
Something I want to pick up on that, Peter, you mentioned was that this is not unique to the Liberals. Sure, they've been in power in Ontario for about, if not already 15 years, almost 15 years. I think it was 2003 when Dalton McGuinty rode to power there. But what kind of sticks out to me is that this is a common problem amongst all the parties. So I don't know, like in terms of finding a solution, how do we move forward? Matt, how would parties, I mean, if everyone has this problem, if this is a hurdle for everyone, it's not necessarily the parties that are an issue at their core, it's we're not approaching the problem right. How can they try and shake things up and do things differently?
Well, I think people are living too long, which is something that governments...
What were we saying?
I'm being flippant, but
no, we know.
Governments budget for a certain capacity, and then careful. and
looking for
people are healthier. People are living longer. And sometimes that blows the budget. I think at the end of the day, the government can solve any problem it wants to. Any one problem it wants to. And healthcare is not just one isolated problem. When you think of the mental health stuff, the need for urgent care, I don't even know where you start. Better diagnostic services, there's only so many dollars to go around, and I don't know how you pick and choose when that's what you're dealing with.
When you're dealing with a policy that is now in place about, what is it, hallway medicine. Isn't that frightening?
Protocol.
Absolutely. And I always like to bring up this point because I watched the mental health hospital being built at Parkwood. But the interesting thing is they built the parking garage first. Beautiful parking garage, which would accommodate a lot of people. And then they built the mental health building.
Separate construction firms, that's why.
But who was first, the cars or the people? I mean, to me it made such...
revenue generation.
Yes, of course it is, the parking lot. But when you said Dalton rode in on something, I didn't know, I wondered if it was a jackass, because I think we've had horrific problems for the last 15 years. And we're nowhere near solving it, and this election isn't going to solve it either.
I think that was a big wake-up call for him. He wanted to be the education premier, and he rode in with promises not to increase spending, and then the first thing he did was a health premium. Because he realized very quickly, crap, there's not enough dollars in this healthcare system. We need to find it somewhere.
And he was trying to play a game of let's try to balance the interests of always cutting our revenue streams by tax cutting, because we don't want to upset anyone about having to raise their taxes to pay for things. And also then going, well, what do I do? Oh, I have to generate money. Oh, let's go to a more regressive premium system, which even today has loopholes. The wealthiest law firms can totally avoid paying it because they're law firms. We could have fixed that one. Like, that could have been fixed by the Liberals any time they wanted to.
Here's another show we could do, loopholes, because there's lots of them.
We'll talk to the management here at Rogers, and we'll pitch that. I think it's got a great ring to it.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Loopholes, it's nice.
Yeah.
Something that strikes me as we're talking about the healthcare issue is that in healthcare, you have to triage. I watch a lot of medical shows, and thankfully I am privileged to know a number of people in medical profession, friends that I've grown up with and who are now nurses, paramedics, doctors in some cases, physiotherapists. But you know, it's in life, in a medical setting, as in a government, you have to triage your priorities. But that becomes extremely difficult when the reality of people's lives and the limited cash flow is very apparent. So I don't envy anyone, who's the minister on that portfolio, Helena Jazik right now, Dr. Helena Jazik. Before her, you know, it's tricky. It's not an easy thing to be doing. Plus, you are the public punching bag, if you will, for when there are issues. And that's, I mean, that's the job. You've signed up for it. You're going to be there. But it's honestly, like, I feel like it just has to be some kind of a massive triage system. And I don't know how you put one thing ahead of another in that case.
Then I just want to jump in with the loopholes, because we went through a triage situation, and we waited 8 hours in the emergency room, and the nurse, who lovely, tried her best, said, you know how you deal with it? You phone an ambulance, because you don't go through the same system. So when they talk about double tier, 2-tier, triple tier, so you go immediately in. And by the time I went in, there was 4 patients who had bumped really sick young children, and they were all in shackles. And they were brought in ambulance and in paddy wagons. So there is a method to escape the emergency room. You call an ambulance, and that's wrong.
I know, it's unfortunate.
That's wrong, yeah.
But I mean, this is the kind of thing that, you know, I was working in the emerge department 25 years ago, and this would occasionally happen, but we were resourced.
Yeah.
We barely ever had code gridlock in this city or ambulance bypass. It would happen, but we had like 4 functioning emerge departments then. We have 2 that are barely making it right now, and 1, you know, overwhelmed walk-in ambulatory center at St. Joseph's.
Yeah.
We did this with a real bad sense of what our priorities are as our society. And when you value, you know, giving money to the wealthiest elites over universal care, this is where you head. We're looking like the Americans increasingly. And this is not the society I think any of us wants. I think we're proud to be Canadian. So, I mean, I've seen the whole thing changing in my lifetime within the hospital sector in this city. And you mentioned long-term care. Well, you know, throw out for over a 10-year span, you're going to put this many more long-term care beds in the service. We need 34,000, not even 30,000 is meeting it. 10 years, it's going to be double that. And on 60% of those firms that run it are private, making exorbitant money off of us to subsidize people to be there. We shut down, during Mr. Harris's reign, 10,000 chronic care beds. We don't have chronic care anymore. Did you notice? It's long-term care now. And people benefit from that. We make choices. There are winners and losers. Right now, most of us are losing. 1% isn't.
So Pete, when you vote, who do you vote for?
Yeah, that's
the Communist Party.
Well,
Che Guevara shirt on your head.
So, in that vein, though, where not so much the communism vein, but as we're talking about all of the issues, because I had notes here. Do we trust the Liberals to fix the system? I think that's pretty clear. Nah, from what we were hearing on this panel. And I asked before, you know, who really can fix this, or how do we go about fixing it? I mean, it's got to be a multi-party approach, does it not? Like, do we need like just a massive review of everything that's wrong and make a list and start ticking down to try and fix it? That, of course, is going to take a ton of time and more money. It seems like no matter what we do, there are no quick fixes, and it's again, it's going to be ugly before it gets better, right?
Well, Jess, it took a generation to make it this way. We can do it again. We can fix it, and it has to be multi-partisan, not just
I agree
a
with
long ideological
I
lines.
just wanted to make sure Matt got in there because we had
my
a thought.
apologies, Matt.
I'm wondering about we've done that before, the Romano Commission, and
How
if we
effective is it?
revisited that, have we really accomplished any of those recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if that's even.
It's kind of like the mayor's poverty panel. The problem is it's the old adage, what's a camel? It's a horse gone to committee. So what happens when you look at something like this, you almost have to erupt. Mm-hmm. It has to be a scorched earth, flat policy.
Phoenix rise from the ashes.
Yeah. If we're going to do it, how are we really going to make it happen? And too many recommendations. It really has to be looked at, and it's got to be all parties. Everybody has to admit that we're in a crisis in healthcare and that we need to address this quickly, and it can't be about political lines. It can't be. I think I've reached an age where I think, yes, I'm conservative, always have been, but my goodness, majority of my friends are whatever. We talk about what's the best. What's the best for all of us, right?
Our lessons of history. Tommy Douglas, CCFer, NDP, created Medicare out of Saskatchewan, moved to all the other provinces. Diefenbaker brings it in. Pearson grows it. Multi-parties, everybody was on board because it's for all of us.
Right.
And we recognize that.
Now, we have to take a break, so that's for all of us. And for all of you, you can run to the washroom, grab a drink, refill, and then come right back after this.
Election? I'm honestly not sure, but there are some aspects of the Liberal platform that I agree with, and some aspects of the NDP platform.
I just hope it's a good, clean election. That the issues take center stage, and it doesn't turn into a clash of personalities.
Is this what freedom looks like?
You will love the Lord thy God with all your heart, or you will feel the pain of his judgment.
We come here, we work, we die.
The future of mankind depends on what we do today!
My name is June Osborne. I am free.
Hi, I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Hillary.
Watch Giving Back as we highlight the rock stars of our community who are giving back.
And there's lots of them, so watch us on Rogers TV.
You should expect to take the occasional fall when you are paddleboarding, so always have your tether attached. If you lose your balance, aim for the side so that you fall into the water. To get back on your board from the side, pull yourself aboard while remaining in the prone position. Once aboard, reorient yourself so that you're facing the front of the board. Then, using your paddle to brace yourself, get up to your knees and then stand.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. We have had a very spirited discussion with our panel today. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. We've gone over a lot of great topics. We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to quickly touch upon party perception as we head into the bulk of this campaign, starting with the Liberals. This is a bit rapid fire. Have they just too much baggage? I mean, we know Kathleen Wynne is quite the campaigner, quite the politician, but can they come back from this, from all of the scandals, gas plants, hydro, you name it, they have an issue with it, basically every portfolio, it seems.
I don't think they can this time. The analogy I'm using is the 2015 federal election. I think people are just unhappy with the sitting government and they're willing to move on.
It's time to go.
I totally agree. They're unelectable.
I think they are, but I think that one of the problems we face in this province is Toronto, which is an unknown. If Toronto decides they're going to go with the Liberals, then we're done. she's back.
All right, moving on to the Progressive Conservatives and their leader, Doug Ford. A bit of a surprise for some people that he was chosen as the party leader after the scandal with Patrick Brown. Do we think that he helps or hinders? He has that everyman charm. He tells it like it is, kind of shoots from the hip. Is that a hindrance or a help?
Can't be any worse than the other leaders we've had. Trust me. He's hokey and people like hokey, and that's all right.
But I also see that they are keeping him in a nice little bubble so that the media can't really talk to him too much. It's very reminiscent of what they did with the certain president down south. And so it'll remain to be seen. It remains to be seen.
Okay.
And I think his brother may be more prone to the controversial statements. Yeah. Doug seems to be more disciplined at this point in the campaign.
He is.
Not to deviate too much on it, it's interesting because of the Rob Ford baggage. There is that, I don't want to say stigma, but it is a memory that a lot of people have of that. He was almost like a character instead of the person, Rob Ford. So we are seeing a big difference in terms of how Doug conducts himself, obviously. To the NDP, Andrea Horwath, she's obviously, this is her third election. I think she's going in with the NDP party here in Ontario. The platform isn't completely out, not completely costed. A lot of times we think of Bob Rae when we think of Ontario NDP. Would Ontario be ready for another NDP leader, or are we still a bit gun-shy?
Oh, I'm definitely gun-shy. Oh, yeah. Like when Bob Rae went in to get his Minister of Finance, he asked who had a bank account, and that's how he appointed them. So, yeah, no, I wouldn't want NDP government in Ontario.
I can only suggest that perhaps we've had it with the other two corporate parties. It's maybe time to give them another try.
Now we know where Peter's going.
The Communist Party.
Che. Right.
I think it's interesting that it's been 3 elections now, and people still don't have very strong opinions, in polling anyway, about Andrea Horwath. Right. So that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. When I think of Bob Rae winning, it's because he was going against 2 pretty unpopular leaders. And so if you're somebody that people just feel okay about, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you'll wake up as premier.
Thought on that, and it's funny because I had it in my notes. You can tell that I had it too before you said it. With the NDP, no disrespect intended, but if they don't really ever, I shouldn't say that. If they don't perhaps think that it's a reasonable possibility that they would be elected June 7th, would they be prepared in a situation June 8th if they are elected, or are they perhaps a dog chasing its tail that catches it and says, "What do I do now?" Is that a situation that we could find ourselves in?
It's not an aha moment for them. It's an absolute, now what do we do?
It generally happens to most parties that don't expect to be the government.
That's right.
Generally does.
Yeah. We're ready. Conservatives are ready.
They're always ready.
It's a tough argument for the third party to make because they have to sort of make a 2-stage argument. We're better than the people in power, but we're also better than that other better positioned alternative right now, the official opposition party. So it's a bigger hill for them to climb, I think.
But they sold their soul for the 15% reduction on the car insurance, which never materialized.
I'm jumping in because we only have a minute. So rapid fire. You wake up June 8th. I'm on the radio on 980 CFPL. I'm telling you the news of the day. Who am I saying won the election? Really quick. Right down the line. Cheryl.
Andrea Horwath. Just
PCs.
PCs. Matt?
I think Doug Ford's the premier.
Okay, it's going to be very interesting in the next month and a bit. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsmakers. Thank you to our panel, Cheryl Miller, Peter Bergmanis, and Matt Farrell. Thank you so much, and may the odds be ever in the favor of the candidates running.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
part about being at Rogers is meeting all the different people, like from producers, other volunteers, and other people who just like work around here, and other hosts are a lot of fun to be around. I would definitely recommend people to come volunteer at Rogers because I got a lot out of this experience. I met a lot of people I wouldn't have otherwise met, and it got me into a program that I really enjoy at Fanshawe.
After a night out with your friends, not having a plan for a safe ride home can leave you in a bad spot. You could end up riding in a police car, an ambulance, or